Hi everyone, it's Lauren, and in this video I'm going to be talking you through the books that I read in December and the first half of January, because let's be honest, I didn't read very much in December. I was doing a lot of Christmasing. So I have 4 books for you here today, and some really, quite a range and some interesting thoughts I have on them as well. So the first book that I read in December was 1984 by George Orwell. I know you can't really see that because of the cover. And this was really interesting. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. There's not a great deal of plot in the book. Really, it's more about this imagined futuristic world, this dictatorship of Big Brother, and it's kind of George Orwell in the 40s looking forward and thinking how technology will change and affect politics and this kind of form of dictatorship. So we're following Winston, who works in, I think it's the Truth Factory or something. I can't remember what he does, but his job is to take news articles and change them and change the history, so that if what the party says changes or their mind changes or something else happens, he changes the history so it mirrors what's happening in the present. But he's not like a massively likeable, character. He's not got that much personality, really. He's not going to charge in and defeat Big Brother, and that's what I quite liked. It's much more about him just being quite bemused about it, and sort of where that takes him when he gets involved with some other people. The premise of the party and the situation in Oceania, where they are, I think was obviously very, very interesting, especially for the time it was written. It feels especially pertinent now with the situation of not even post-truth, it's more like with the technology that we have now, it's so difficult to ascertain what is true, and pictures can be altered in the way that he's describing in this. And it feels very of the now to be reading this book. I will say there were some parts that dragged a little bit, especially with the excessive description of this world and how it all fits together and how it came to be. I feel like this could have been a novella, although I really enjoyed his ideas. The plot itself is very, very thin, which is what you would expect to a certain extent. But also I don't feel like I needed that much detailed description of this world. So probably could have done with a bit of an edit in hindsight, but definitely enjoyed the overall experience, and I think a very important thing to read. Next I picked up Marianna by Monica Dickens, and this is interesting because this is probably the second book, I think it says, that Persephone Books published. And a lot of people, when they talk about the Persephone books in general, a lot of people cite this as a really good one and say they really enjoy her writing. And I did really enjoy her writing, but I feel like the book itself almost geared me up for a story or a plot which then it didn't deliver upon, which is quite bizarre. So this is generally following the life of a woman called Mary, but it begins with this prologue where she's coming into her cottage. It's during the war, it's raining, she's listening to the wireless, and she thinks that a boat that her husband is on has sunk. So she doesn't know whether he survived or not, and she's kind of there by herself. It's so atmospheric. I loved that beginning, and I was so geared up for this book. I really loved her writing. And then after that prologue, it goes back to Mary's childhood, and then we just get her life. And I was like, oh, okay, so that's what we're doing then. That's not really what I thought this book was going to be. And her writing's really good. I liked all the characters. Mary's kind of an odd character because she's sort of doesn't really know what she wants. She's sort of bounding around life, which could be quite annoying, but I still quite warmed to her. I liked her mother, I liked her Uncle Jeff, and like her discussion with all of her family. But the way it was structured was a bit odd to me. It didn't really feel like anything that happened in her past made a difference to what was going to happen in her future. It was like her life was just happening. It didn't feel like the plot of a novel. So if I'd gone in knowing that, or I hadn't had that prologue at the beginning, perhaps, I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. So if you're interested in reading writing from that time, I would definitely recommend it, but just maybe ignore the prologue before you get stuck in. I'm going to leave my favourite book that I've read last so that we go out on a big high. So the next book I'm going to talk to you about is An Unremarkable Body by Elisa Lodato. And I read this because it was shortlisted for the first novel award for the Costa Prize. And I really don't want to say this because I sound really patronising when I say it, but I feel like overall I really enjoyed it, really liked her writing, but it did feel like a first novel to me, and I can't really put my finger on why, but some parts of it felt slightly not quite there, structure-wise, pace-wise, maybe linking all the plots together. I'm not really sure what it was, but it just felt like a really, really good start, which sounds so like, oh, good start, like I'm not going to write a novel, am I? But I feel like she's gonna do better things. Like, her writing itself I really enjoyed. The premise for the novel is that this woman's mother has died, so she's gone to her house and found her having fallen down the stairs, and she's going through the post-mortem report, and as the post-mortem is looking at different aspects of her mother's body to try and ascertain the cause of death, she's linking things that are coming up in that report, such as a scar in her ear, and she's going back into her mother's life and thinking, oh, I remember when she got that scar, and we're kind of getting her mother's story through her body. And as an idea, as a concept, I really liked that. I loved hearing about her mother's past and how her situation, how her marriage came to be. I felt like it didn't link that well with the narrator's kind of modern day life, but I also liked her writing in that section of the book as well. So she's dealing with grief, and she's trying to work out what was going on with her mum, talking to her dad, talking to her mum's best friend. There's things going on with her friend and like an ex-boyfriend. There's quite a lot going on in her life as well, and I really enjoyed that. I'm not sure the two things married up perfectly, but I really enjoyed the reading experience. I read it so quickly. I don't want this to sound like this is a bad review, because I definitely think this is one that people should check out. I think that was just my overall takeaway from it, is that when she writes another book, which I think she has already actually, to be fair, but anything else she writes I would be really interested in reading. And now my favourite book, I'm gonna put a wager on that this will be in my top books of 2019 at the end of the year. I really, really enjoyed it, and that was The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. So Pat Barker has taken the story of the Iliad and she's retold it, but she's told it from the point of view of Briseis, who is a Trojan queen who is captured and sold into slavery. Well, not sold, but taken as a war prize by Achilles, so she is his prize woman. And it's from her perspective. And what I loved about it, what's great about this book, is that we know the story of the Iliad. Well, I'm quite familiar with the story of the Iliad, and despite knowing what was going to happen, I was so invested in the story, because Briseis is telling it from the perspective from the women who are so often silenced, and not just the women, just the powerless people in this situation. You get stories of kings and heroes and people who are pushing the plot on, and the destroyers of this and the sackers of the city, and you see the glory of that side. But the reality of this situation is that so many people are just being needlessly killed. A lot of people are very vulnerable in this situation. Briseis and the other women have had to see these the Greeks kill their husbands and brothers and friends and destroy their cities, and now not only do they have to live with them as slaves, but they also have to be raped by them, and they have to serve them and live amongst them, and be silent about that and just get on with it. So it's such an interesting take on this story. I thought her writing was excellent. I felt really emotionally invested in it, and I think even if you don't know the story of the Iliad, you get enough of the plot anyway, because Briseis is right in there with Achilles and seeing what's going on. So you'd still get a side of this story, you still get that plot. And I think that's really important with a retelling, that you're bringing something new to the table. So you're bringing a different perspective, or you're talking about something that hasn't really been talked about enough before. And I think that's what Pat Barker's doing here. So it really felt like different and original, and also just it's a good tale. It is a good story, and you felt like you were really in with that plot at the same time. So yeah, I don't think I really have anything bad to say about this book. I really, really loved it. I'd really recommend it, whether you're into Greek myth or not. I still think it's really worth a read. So that's me for the first part of this year. I'd love to hear what you've been reading in December and the beginning of January. What plans have you got to read? What are you looking forward to reading next? Have you read any of these? I'd also like to hear from you if you've got opinions on that. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.